Okay, we are going to get things started here. Welcome, everyone from all over the world. We're seeing people jumping in. Welcome to the TMS webinar today, which is Practice Playbook, Field Chairs, Scale Smarter. My name is Mark Savar. I lead global marketing communications here with Magstim and our parent company, Welcony. And we are going to get going here in just a couple minutes as people are coming into the room. We have put together an amazing panel. Actually, my panels have put together an amazing panel. I'm basically your host today. Think of me as your airline pilot, your informational airline pilot as we move forward through this webinar. So if you're in a TMS practice right now, you offer a TMS practice, you're thinking about it, you're in the right place because we're going to give you the tools and techniques, at least start that process to think about how to operationally manage and accelerate your practice for sure. Um, as I'm looking, more people are coming in. And I'm coming to you live from our Magstim North American headquarters here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Magstim, we've been doing this for a very long time. This webinar is not about Magstim technology. This webinar is to provide you tools and techniques to grow and accelerate your practice. While we're getting things moving, I'm going to invite my colleague Lindy Bostick into the room because Lindy is a great teammate of mine to go out and work with the practices. Lindy, you're in the field all the time working with practices to do installs to get them up and running, correct?
Yes, yes, all over the country. Thank you for joining us.
Fantastic. So a quick little bit of housekeeping. If you look down below in the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A, and I want everybody to put your questions in there because we will be answering questions as we go further into this webinar, and that will be fantastic. Quick housekeeping statement. Legal, I got to read these things, otherwise I'll be in trouble here. Magstim webinar. Content presented here remains the intellectual property of the authors and the presenters today. Okay. This webinar is sponsored and organized by Magstim. However, Magstim does not engage in generating or editing content presented, and inclusion in this webinar should not be taken as an endorsement by Magstim. So, as we're moving into this, I think we're going to be addressing a lot of the topics that are going to move forward. All right. I'm looking at the top of the hour. We're going to get things moving. All right. I'm going to invite my panelists into the room to turn on their video, turn on their audio, so you don't have to hear Mark talk too much during this process. But um, we are going to get this moving right now. People coming in from all over. Fantastic. Okay. First, I want to introduce Dr. Narwal. Dr. Narwal, good to see you today. Now, you are the founder of Mycohi. You're a physician, a researcher, and an advisor. You're working every day in TMS, are you not, doctor?
Every day in TMS, and it's honestly a pleasure. And thank you, Mark and Lindy, for having me here, and thank you, Maxim, for having us here. This is exciting. But yes, Mark, working every day in TMS, and there is no shortage of TMS conversations out there.
Fantastic. Well, we're honored you could be here to share your insights because people want to know more. This webinar was put together by request. More people are asking, what can we do to grow my practice? I also want to introduce Ben Spielberg, from the founder of Solstice Training Institute. Ben, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Mark?
Everything is great in Minnesota because we don't have snow anymore for right now. But now with the Solstice training, you are literally working with practices to help them grow and accelerate, correct?
I am, yeah. So I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I started an interventional psychiatry. I started a few interventional psychiatry focused facilities in California in 2018. I sold them this past August to Stella Mental Health, and during my time running the clinics, I noticed that it was really difficult to get my staff trained. It took a lot of energy and resources, and I wanted to make sure that the training was consistent. So I started Solstice Training Institute, which is a public benefit corporation that trains technicians, providers, and clinic owners on how to do TMS at a very high level of competence.
Fantastic. And Dr. Narwal, your practice, Myco, you were actually working with practices to support them with marketing and other channels and
Yes.
things.
Yeah, just like Ben, I started into the practice space originally as a psychiatrist and as a founder and business development professional, I think one of the things I've learned in having practices that offer TMS is it takes a village. And so I took that experience from 2018 to 2023 over the course of less than 5 years, building two centers of excellence, and just like Ben, kind of taking an exit and going into training. But on my end, my agency, my COE, we actually offer marketing services for a lot of mental health providers that offer TMS, Spravato, and other forms of intervention. But we also focus on practice development and practice development consulting specifically. And I have the pleasure of being a trainer at Solstice Training Institute as well. And I'm really grateful to Ben to be able to help a lot of our providers with in clinics with operations training, clinic training, things of that nature. So it all kind of is relative in what we do. I think Ben and I can agree that there's a need for a conversation around what is the playbook, to how we do this thing. And I think things have changed when we were doing this a couple of years back. I'm not trying to age us at all. I think Ben and I are fairly young, but definitely the grays are starting to show. But I think it tells you that things have evolved and changed in this landscape, and really excited to talk about that with everybody today.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do this as a bit of a roundtable. People don't need any more PowerPoint decks. I'm happy to send them if you want them. I'm around marketing at Magstim.com. But let's get it moving here. I mean, this is put together, big picture. I mean, the first question I'm going to pose to both of you is what's the single biggest operational challenge facing TMS practices this year? Because there's been a lot, and there's been a lot at the end of last year and a lot of this year as well, with new clearances, new operational things, and I'll let either one of you jump in to address what is the operational challenge facing TMS practices.
I think from my perspective, you have to sort of bifurcate the answer, because with smaller clinics, it's usually an infrastructure problem. There's usually not enough infrastructure. There's not enough systems. There's not enough people to handle all of the complexities of running like a high quality TMS operation. You need people doing prior authorizations. You need to kind of know when those get submitted, to have a system for peer-to-peers if there's a denial. But funny enough, I think for larger clinics, you sort of inherently build that infrastructure as you grow, but you end up losing a lot on the training side of things. So you may have like a really solid billing and revenue cycle management platform as you grow, but then all of a sudden, like you're hiring more and more technicians, but their training is unless you're sort of consciously going out and focusing on their training, it becomes something that sort of starts to fall through the cracks with bigger clinics. So your technicians and providers may not be able to speak to TMS as well, and they may not be able to actually operate TMS as effectively as some of the smaller players.
Great. Well, I think that's important.
Yeah, Ben, you're right. Spot on about the smaller practices. I think it's a heavier lift, because the idea is we just need one person to do the treatments and the benefits and the authorizations. And you realize when your first chair starts to pick up the number of patients it's being able to treat, you start to stretch yourselves very thin. And that's where the clinic anxiety starts to set in. But to answer your question even further, Mark, I think part of what we have to understand is the TMS market is no longer in the education phase. We're in the execution phase now. I think when we were looking at what originally was the issue for, I don't want to say the issue, Ben, but I think for you and I, when we were offering TMS services, the bottleneck was demand. Now that's not the case anymore. I think it's more about, most practices don't have a demand problem. They have a conversion and capacity problem. And we have to remind ourselves that I think the biggest operational takeaway is the patients are out there. You spend money on marketing, which everybody does. I personally know that. Myself as a clinic owner and as somebody who provides marketing services, that there's such a spend there, but we realize that's not the only battle you have to take. And my team and I always talk about this one statement: patient acquisition is multifactorial. So operations tie really heavily into it, and how you do that is very, very important, because TMS awareness is rising, but again, only a small percentage of patients have been treated at this time.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I think that sort of sets the stage for this webinar in terms of what people could do to, both foundationally change what they're doing and then go to the next level. Ben, you and I were talking earlier about, patient throughput, right? And that landscape has changed as well, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely it has. Yeah. I mean, I think I think like when you talk about patient acquisition, like when Dr. Narwal and I were running our clinics, TMS was not seen as something that was mainstream for the most part. Even psychiatrists who follow the APA religiously they sort of looked at TMS as this very questionable experimental procedure, despite its FDA approval. And I think now TMS is really like it's become standard of care, and so the problem that's kind of the first stage of the funnel that we faced, which was like, how do we, for the most part, it was, how do we let patients know that this is something that will help them when they've never heard about it and that we offer it. And now it's more of like we just have to let people know that we do TMS. But a lot of times what happens, especially at the smaller practice level, is that, you develop these like wonderful marketing campaigns and the phone's ringing, but you have like one front desk person whose responsibility is admin, but they're too busy with like, responding to pharmacies regarding medication refill requests.
Right.
And a potential new patient is on the phone and can't get through, so it goes to voicemail, and that patient ends up calling the next person on their Google Maps list,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
is bad. We don't want that. And and so I think there becomes a point where, clinics have to sort of like separate admissions or an intakes phone system from like the general phone number, which also kind of adds a lot of complexities with your phone systems and IT and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you look at to maximize your patient throughput, I think you have to look at what happens on the front end to the back end, and the part of that also is the patient experience from A to Z.
Mm.
I always emphasize how much investment clinics and providers make into their offices and the team members and nice modern chic furniture and aesthetics and all of that stuff is invested in. But then the one thing we drop the ball on sometimes is the actual conversation taking place, because one of the things we do at my Cohi is mystery calls. We'll actually assess clinics and understand, hey, how well are you doing on the front desk side of things? And some of those I tell them, go to Solstice and get some training done because you guys are slacking here a little bit. And here, what I hear is, oh, yes, we offer TMS. It's 30 plus sessions and we take insurance. Do you have depression? Do you have insurance? And that's how the conversation usually goes. And what ends up happening is a patient gets overwhelmed. It becomes
Right.
a barrier to entry. And you have to look at every chair as a revenue producing asset, right? So if you're not getting the front end of it corrected, then the back end of it, your revenue producing asset, just becomes a pretty much a coat hanger at this point. And I
Hmm.
also want to emphasize, if your chairs aren't full, your marketing isn't the first problem. Really, it could be your scheduling, it could be your operations, and it could be the conversation you're having on the front end.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that
Hmm.
insight. So you provided the perfect segue, Doctor, to insurance. I mean, look, we could do 4 webinars back to back to talk about insurance, which we can't do that today. But just generally, tell me, either one of you, there's been a lot of changes, particularly in the past, few months about insurance coverage for TMS. And tell me what you're seeing work now, right? What are the solutions? If I have a practice here in Minnesota, what should I be thinking about for insurance?
Yeah. Then I'll start with this one. I think I love talking
Mhm.
about insurance because it's been like, I always joke with all of our clients and providers and colleagues, insurance is the devil. They make everything difficult. However, as of recent, thank you Cigna for being so much easier now, and Evernorth just requiring no prior auths, right? That's been a big barrier. I think one of the things a lot of people could do is treat your prior auth like it's a conversion step, not an administrative task. And when you do that, I think you
Hmm.
kind of set the bar of what these authorizations mean, and to treat that for a patient as a victory, because hey, you're given a chance to do something that most people can't get access to or afford or get authorized to do. So you have to treat that like a big conversion step. And I want to emphasize how much we don't really talk about documentation for authorizations. We're looking at med trials, diagnosis, therapy history. Great, we have our information. No, actually, the stronger your documentation, the stronger your collateral, the stronger the measures. That's how you avoid denials. So one of the things we really focused on internally was not having our peer-to-peer reviews for any appeals, because I wanted clear-cut authorizations, and I don't want any reason for an insurance company to give us a denial or an appeal. So our documentation was strong, and the authorization process was considered a conversion step, for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. Ben, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well, correct?
I could write a dissertation on it. Yeah, I very much agree that like the prior authorization should be tracked to the conversion. It's a very important business metric, and I think what some of us on this webinar we've talked about before is how with interventional psychiatry, you really have to treat it like a business, whereas I think routine psychiatry was
Yeah.
a little bit easier. Patients, there was such a need for it that patients would kind of find you on insurance directories, and you wouldn't have to consider like white glove service and looking at business metrics to enable your business success. Uh, With with insurance, I think over time it's generally gotten a lot easier to get people approved for TMS. However, there are still certain indications where it feels like we need to move the needle forward a little bit more. Not every payer has a policy on TMS for OCD right now. Um, I think what a lot of practices that I've talked to tend to miss is actually not what's written in the medical necessity policies, but rather like the cases that you can get pushed through when you go to peer review. So, for example, even though a lot of the medical necessity policies may say, we don't cover TMS for bipolar disorder or for postpartum depression, you can get those approved if there's a good clinical case for it. You just have to make that clinical case. And I think additionally, what I've seen a lot is, TMS is great for 36 sessions. I've personally seen a lot of patients when I was running the clinics do a lot better if they can get another 15 or so sessions tacked onto the course. And we know this from a lot of accelerated data that, more TMS sessions is generally associated with a higher response rate. And what a lot of practices tend to miss out on is when someone's reached 36 sessions, if there's a good case for additional TMS sessions, they can submit an authorization request for another 15 sessions and make the case. Maybe the patient
Oh,
was a slow responder, and if they haven't plateaued, it's a great reason to get an approval for additional sessions.
Yeah.
those are,
And I kind of,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead,
Mark,
Mark.
I want to add on that because Ben, you bring a great point up about the extensions and the retention of certain TMS patients. We tend to forget that the clinical data and the studies that led to the FDA clearance for TMS for depression gave the sweet spot of number of sessions between 30 and 40 treatments. But we know
Mhm.
there's a population that goes past 40 sessions. And let me rephrase, it's not necessarily sessions, it's the amount of pulses you get during a given time, right? So if we can
Mhm.
extend that, it's a higher dosage. I've always told patients, and I've talked to insurance companies about this in the past during appeals, is hey, I need an extension because this patient has been receiving TMS as having a benefit, but we haven't hit the right
Mhm.
dosage. And by dosage, I mean number of treatments. And I think everybody is different in that capacity. We can have John Smith respond at 20 sessions and get a durable response with TMS, but Mary F might need, you know, to 45, 50 plus sessions. And this also begs the question of second rounds. I mean, a lot of providers, it's shocking to me. I mean, don't know that you can do up to three rounds of TMS in some cases in one calendar year, if not two.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. I had one lady come to me every year, once a year, for 5 straight years for TMS, and that was her thing, And I think it's
Right.
important to understand that there
Yeah.
are some insurance openings, and there are also some insurance barriers. But as I quote the Water Boy, insurance is still the devil to me. That's how I
Right.
look at it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and look, we're hopeful. I mean, because we see a lot of changes within the Magstim family that things are, improving to make things easier for everyone. All
Yeah.
right, so let's go to the kind of one of the bigger issues is constant patient pipeline. Look, we work with practices. We don't do the marketing for them, but we actually provide assets and things like that. But let's talk about like high quality patient, the referral to other practices. We'll go back to Mark owning his own TMS practice here in Minnesota, and I don't know anything about marketing. Just pretend, where should I start with getting both, I guess, patient referrals? Do I do marketing? Do I do all three bundles? And this
Yeah.
is coming from somebody who does marketing for Magstim, right? So I'll just put it out to both of you. What's working for people now? And I think that's the question we got in advance is tell me what works for people to get more patients in the chair now.
Yeah. I would start with the idea that you have to look at your market specifically. Number one, I think it's different for somebody in in Gainesville, Florida versus Atlanta, Georgia, or Los Angeles. I think it's a very different dynamic of where your referrals come from. I think if you're in a large urban area, if you have a number of providers and you're in a large urban area, it's let's make sure internally you're referring. Number one, that's sometimes I feel like we miss that a lot with internal referrals. And then secondly, if
Mm,
you're in a large urban area, make sure your marketing is really effective on a digital footprint, but also that you have an established network of referrals externally as well. And I think referrals externally, no matter where you are, come from two different avenues: people that are in healthcare, people that are not in healthcare. I have discovered this early in my day was finding our relationships with EAP providers, HR programs for companies and businesses. They have policies and corporate insurance coverage that allows them to do TMS, and they're a great bridge to that gap in terms of patients accessing care. And then from a clinical or healthcare referral standpoint, everyone thinks that counselors are the way to go, and as much as the counselors and psychotherapists should be somebody you should get referrals from, I do want to point out that psychiatrists, obviously in that category, I want to point out primary care physicians, endocrinologists,
mhm.
OB-GYN, nephrologists, other specialty levels of care are referral sources. 1 out of 4 patients that see a nephrologist, I'm not sorry, let me rephrase. 1 out of 4 patients that see a hematologist or oncologist are suffering from a mental health condition. You look at pediatricians right now, a great referral source, especially with the new FDA indications. You can treat people as young as 15 years of age. And how many of us have gone to our pediatricians into our 20s? And you know what pediatricians don't love to do is prescribe psych meds. How do I know that? My sister's a pediatrician in Bellingham, Washington. And she calls me all the time saying, I have a case. I have a case. I'm like, refer it. It's not your wheelhouse. Like, refer it. So that's where I would start. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Ben, I know you have thoughts on this as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a data perspective, like the patients who come referred by a healthcare practitioner are by far the most likely to convert into like sitting in that chair and getting TMS done. If someone is a trusted doctor, they're going to go to where their doctor sends them. However, if their doctor just says do TMS, not go to so and so facility, then they're just going to look for a TMS place. But the more specific you can get that referral, the more likely they'll be a TMS patient. The difficulty of like getting those professional referrals is so variable by market. In LA, it's very, very challenging. People are really, really busy. Everyone is working really hard there. New York's very challenging. Other places, it's a lot easier to get in touch and make contact with other providers who could refer patients. I think, secondly, like the second tier when I was running the clinics were always the people who found us organically on the website. So this would typically come from like SEO efforts, or sort of like whatever we could do that wasn't like pay per click that would build demand. Those patients would also tend to convert to TMS at a higher clip. The lowest converters for us were typically people who came from like digital advertisements. I need to stop doing that. So, people who came from like Facebook ads in LA specifically almost never converted into TMS. And then last thing, sorry, I know I'm going on, but Dr. Narwal illuminated this, but if you have an existing psychiatry practice, your existing patients should be your best referral source. However,
Agreed.
that does require, depending on how many providers are involved in the practice, it does require a lot of training for those providers. You have to teach them about TMS, tell them what kind of patients qualify, tell them how to answer patient questions about TMS. They really have to know the whole system A through Z, which that's something Solstice could help with, or the practice owner can, personally work with all the providers as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you've tipped already to this like um, patient journey, and that's the next kind of question, right? So you get an inquiry, you have a patient referral. How do you then take that process through to get them in the chair? And what do you see working now? Because as you mentioned, just the general broad reach, and in marketing we say it's just, spray it out everywhere, and that's not always the case. You want to be targeted, right? But once you have somebody who's interested, what works for the patient journey experience to get them in the chair?
I think for when I was running my clinics, the two things that felt like they made the biggest difference for us were being able to speak with a level of expertise that most other people answering the phone couldn't speak to. And so I would make sure to train everyone answering the phone on very advanced TMS topics because I know that patients maybe asking what kind of machine do you have? Are you doing theta burst stimulation? Can you do an anxiety protocol? That's what patients are looking up when they're, deciding whether they should do TMS on Reddit and whatnot. And those are the kind of questions that they ask. The other really helpful component was speed. Being able to get them in for an evaluation as quickly as possible was very, very important. And if whatever provider you have is booked out for 2 weeks, they're almost never going to wait out that 2 weeks. They will find someone who can see them faster.
Agreed. Yeah, to Ben's point, I think it's about that level of convenience you can create, and I think part of that convenience is being well informed and being able to accommodate. I always tell um, anybody I work with in this capacity that patients are, at the end of the day, consumers, and psychiatry is going through a renaissance. What I mean by that is that, the patients want that gratification, knowing they get their questions answered, knowing you can accommodate them, knowing that you're convenient. I use the ACA analogy, not Affordable Care Act, but accessibility, convenience, and accommodations. You can hit those three, you're going to get that patient. And to Ben's point again, your intake, the educational component there, it's also about an EQ. Having somebody on the phone in 8 to 10 minutes give a macroscopic overview of TMS, but still be able to carry a conversation, ask the right questions, extract the right information, and educate that patient. Those are rock stars at the front, and I think that's what
Yeah.
we need more of. And that's trainable. I don't want to say that everybody can do that. I do think it's a certain personality that you should have at the front. I find that people, I myself hired a technician who did some intake and consultations for me, and she had no healthcare background. She was in the medical aesthetics space, you could say. But her people skills were off the charts. Like her EQ was like amazing. And I asked her, like, where'd you work before this? She's like, oh, Chick-fil-A. I'm like, brilliant. Those guys are awesome. They teach she knew everything about customer service, but her EQ was off the charts. So again, to Ben's point, how well you train the front desk, and then also how well we get that turnaround time. I think those things are really important, and don't lag.
Mhm.
Don't, and we're used to in psychiatry having patients work off of our schedules, right? It's different with TMS now. I think you have to
Yeah.
shift it around a little bit for sure.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
just to add on that, like I think that sometimes there can be some retraining with physicians who are involved in the admissions process because I think physicians tend to think of things in terms of acute care and are they stable or are they not
Right.
stable?
Right.
And so technically like these are stable patients, they're not actively suicidal. They don't need to be, and if they need to be seen right now, then, they should be hospitalized instead. But I think, we kind of need to reframe that when working with doctors, because, the patients who are calling, yes, they're technically stable 99.9% of the time. They don't need to be hospitalized, but they are probably crying on the phone. They are morbidly depressed. They can barely get out of bed, and they're really scared of magnetic brain stimulation. And when they have the energy to make that call, there's like every cell in their body is telling them this is going to be another thing that's not going to work. Don't bother getting out of bed. So you have to really do whatever you can to kind of help to leverage that hope for them until they actually get there and sit in the chair for
Yeah.
their first session.
It's like, think about who you're talking to, right? You're talking to somebody who has an affect that is flat. They're hopeless. They're not motivated. They need the conviction. The fact that they called you is a victory in itself. So really, it's on
Hmm.
us to really take that conversation to the next step. And I just want to point one other example of something that came to mind that as you were talking was, to the urgency of a patient. If they need to see somebody immediately, this may mean a higher level of care. But at the same time, if your hours are limited and you're only doing evals and mappings once a week on a day, that's not easy for some patients. That's one thing. And then I'll give you an example. I had somebody I worked with whose hours were 10 to 4 for TMS, and their question was like, I'm not getting enough patients. And I'm like, well, you might want to change those hours, make it more accessible.
Yeah.
Who in their right mind can come after work or before work with those hours, right? So
Right.
and Ben, I know you did the same thing. Your hours were very accessible, just like ours. You had information and resources available. Consultations were quick, insurance benefits, that stuff was quick, and patients love that. Within 24 hours, I'm getting a benefits back. I'm getting a consultation booked. I'm getting authorized within 2, 3 days. I'm starting TMS. That's a dream for a lot of people. So it has to be that
Yeah.
turnaround time for sure.
Fantastic. This is great. This is
Yeah.
fantastic. And thank you for the inspiration about hearing, because people are looking for more of that, you are their lifeline in a lot of cases
Yeah.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
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 Um, so I want to pivot a little bit and talk about technology and automation, because there's been some advanced questions about that. And it, different practices are doing different things. But I know that there's different tools that people are using. What do you see work now from a practice operation? Is it more like centralized dashboards, or are we at just standard practice operation software? What and then you look at the automation part of it as well, and that can actually integrate within the marketing elements too, correct?
Yeah. I would say, you have to have a system, whether it's a CRM or it's your own internal system. Really, I'm not I'm agnostic to to using what works for you at this point. But I always tell anybody that is starting TMS or getting to TMS to make sure your system, in terms of tracking patients, having that utilization of technology the right way, removing some bottlenecks and having a lead response that is instant from text, having appointment reminders and no show recovery sequences and things like that. You can build those out. That's great. But if you do it manually and you have someone do that, that's even better too. Why? I love the personal touch to certain things. These days, I think all of us get a text message every day about, are you selling your house, or do you want this, or do you want this? And it's a
Right.
lot of clutter on your phone. So how much of it works? I still think there's a question mark around that. The one thing I do want to emphasize, which is I think the big discussion these days, Ben, I'm sure you've heard, and we've talked about it, is the AI agent. Right now, our front desk agent is an AI person, and some of them are brilliant. I mean, it's amazing. But I think the reality is, at the end of the day, a mental health patient's going to want to talk to a person, and that's not
Yeah.
going to change. And that human to human touch is really important still. And so, as much as technology is integrated, as much as we use CRMs and use dashboards, which we should, to keep visibility and things don't fall through the cracks, I think we must emphasize the fact that there must be some element of human connection in that conversation.
Right.
Yeah, very, very much agreed. First of all, I think in general we need more humanity in healthcare. Period.
Yeah.
But especially patients who are, like I mentioned, they're scared, they're depressed, they're doing this, they have the courage to finally inquire about this perceived like very experimental procedure where they still don't quite understand the difference between this and ECT. And the only thing they know about ECT is what they saw in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right.
I think in terms of systems, um, the most important thing is that your electronic medical record system is connected to your revenue cycle management system, which is connected to your CRM and hopefully your phones. The more integrations and interconnectedness you have with your systems, the better. What is really, really painful, especially as you grow, is if you have an EMR that's disconnected from your CRM, that's disconnected from your phone system, and you've no way to attribute leads, and your billing data is completely disconnected. That makes management really difficult, and it makes it so that all of the data that you're outputting from your practice is virtually unusable because you're not sure if you can trust it. Um, I think in terms of dashboards, if you're a TMS only clinic, the most important thing, and we have like TMS dashboards as part of the Solstice course for business owners, but one of the biggest game changers I had is when I stopped thinking about TMS in terms of patient census, because that's a pretty dynamic number. But every week I started looking at the number of units billed for the last week, or billable encounters that occurred over the last week. That gets you a much more realistic number that you can also figure out, and you can also kind of know immediately what your revenue from the past week is.
Right. I think that's essential. And I will say from the marketing side of what we offer here at Magstim, we do work with practices who, are trying to use the automation tools in those, but I've also seen challenges with those, host agents as well, like you pointed out, doctor. And if you're going to do them, you want them to have ability to get a hold of a real person. And I love your quote, that we need more humanity in healthcare because the
Mhm.
AI agents can perform a function, correct, but they're not going to be able to answer all the patient questions.
Right.
Well, I mean, to Ben's point too, I mean, it's the reality of the people we're talking to and what they're looking for and expecting. And I think a lot of us, how many of us have jumped on the phone with customer service with Delta or United Airlines, and that's not giving you anxiety? So why would I want to do that to a patient? It's that I look at it from that perspective, and
Mhm.
I think technology integration is inevitable to a certain extent in mental health and outpatient practice. I think we're going to see more and more tech utilization, but more effectively along the lines of convenience and accommodations, not conversation. I think conversations should stick to the humanity touch that we talked about. That's a big part of it. And just one
Yeah.
last piece to this, um, you know, automated messaging is something I think it's funny. I just got a message from my team members like, oh, one of our clients is asking about this. And, can we change the verbiage? And literally, we're talking about it right now because it sounds so robotic. And that's the thing. It's not about the quantity of how you do things, it's the quality of how you do it. And if you can focus on that, I know it requires extra effort, it's more work to do, but this is what we're here for. We're here to help our patients and be better providers, and that's what a center of excellence does.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. That's essential. So we're going to move into our last little bundle, and then we're going to move into our Q&A. And some people have been posting questions in the Q&A, and if you haven't and you have some, just click on that little button called Q&A. I'll be able to see that in there. So my last little section for this part, it's all about the numbers. We used to have a joke. It's not about the numbers, but it's about the numbers, right? So, you know, Ben, I know that data of where you're at with, both the insurance and as well as sort of the utilization rates of your technology is key, correct? Because you want to have your machines operating, but you also want to make sure that, your cost of patient acquisition is in check, correct?
You do. Yes.
Yeah.
I think about it less in terms of, percentage of like chair utilization, and more of, because I think when people operate like a brick and mortar clinic, you can think about room utilization, especially if you're doing a lot of like therapy or medication management, and you have to make the decision of like, would it be more profitable for me to put a provider in this room full time or to have a TMS chair and a technician in here? And which the answer should be the latter. So I think about it more in terms of units billed and like the just the billable events. But I think understanding your conversion rate at every step of the process is really important. So ideally you want to understand how effective your sort of top of funnel marketing approach is, if whether that's boots on the ground business development or digital marketing campaigns or whatnot. And then you want to understand, where the attrition's happening on every single stage. So, what's going to be your
Yeah.
conversion rate into an initial evaluation? If you have multiple providers doing evals, is there a difference in their individual conversion rates that you can optimize? And then you want to determine your conversion rate for prior authorizations, peer-to-peer rate, which is always going to be lower. And then, all the way until like they actually sit down into the chair in their first session. And if you're doing a good job, once they're in the chair for their first session, it should be highly, highly probable that they will stay for all 36.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. To your point, Ben, I think chair utilization, I'd go back to the example for me of when I started out, and I look at my cousin actually owns a restaurant in New Jersey, and I remember when they first opened it up, every seat in that restaurant was a dollar amount of how much they can make. So early on, I knew that, hey, every space I have in this office needs to be utilized to a certain capacity. And if I have a TMS device, what does that utilization rate look like in making sure that this space is giving me a return? I can tell you right now, if you have a TMS device, your target utilization should be around 80%. I feel that way strongly because anything below 60 means you're losing money. So I like to be in the safe side and say 80%. What does that mean? We'll put that in context of how many patients you'll need to get to that financial metric. Usually a percentage means of what your return looks like. On top of that, I also want to point out numbers that most people tend to not have in reporting, which are business metrics or KPIs that I think we should talk about. I know everyone knows their response and remission rates, and if you don't, please do. That's a very important thing to have in your practice. But what is your compliance rate? What is your retention rate? When I
Right.
say compliance, I'm talking about, to Ben's point, for a patient to do 36 sessions is a big ask, tough ask, but they do it. It's phenomenal. There's a lot of clinics out there that have patients drop off at 30 treatments, 25 treatments. I came across a clinic that had 300 TMS patients with average completion number of sessions was 22,
Mm,
which is pretty bad if you ask me.
Right.
it
Right.
is.
So, yeah, which tells me your compliance is lacking. We put some efforts in place, got on to about 31, which tells us that there are some changes that can be made. And on top of that, that compliance component ties into what you do on the front end, how well you educate, how well you talk to them on the phone, the consultation, the resources, the curriculum while they're in treatment. They're bought in, so your compliance numbers will improve there. And then that'll also impact your retention. The experience they had, and Ben, you know this, there's people that come to your office once and they say, and they swear by everybody, I'm only going to Bespoke or Stella going forward because that's where I had the best experience. That's where I know I'm taken care of. That leads to
Hmm.
good retention numbers. I can tell you, personally speaking, out of every 10 patients, my last 2 years in practice with our TMS devices, out of every 10 patients, almost 4 patients will come back for repeat TMS. So a 40% retention rate was actually a big driver behind our growth and expansion. And
Hmm.
if you put all the effort in having them do TMS once and it can benefit them again, that's a metric you should look at as well from a financial standpoint. I think that plays a lot of value in it. But yeah, that's kind of how I look at it.
Fantastic. This is very inspiring. Thank you both. So
Absolutely.
we're moving into our last 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to just read some of the questions that have been posted in the chat in the Q&A. So if you put questions in there, please do. Um, and if we can't get to your question, we can respond to you later. But if you do not, if you pose the question as anonymous, then I can't respond to you later. So if you have questions on that front, we'll try to get to as many as we can. So uh, a somebody has a question. Could you provide an example of a good front end conversation that doesn't overwhelm the patient and result in scheduling and patient conversion for incurring revenue. And my read on that question is like, what does that talk look like, right? Of, how you engage that patient on their first, intake. And I'll let either one of you answer that.
I mean, I'll jump in and just say how relative can you keep the conversation without overwhelming the patient without big words? If you're going to talk about, TMS and you're going to talk about prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral neuroplasticity, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, you're probably overwhelming that patient. So you have to keep it as layman terms as possible. So a good in front end conversation is, again, we've heard all the literature out there about TMS and what it does, but I always tell my team and anybody I train to tell the patient, hey, TMS is like your brain going to the gym. It's getting a mental workout. It's building muscle memory to practice the idea of being less depressed and getting better and better and better at it. And what we're doing is, because a patient might say, oh, 36 sessions, that's a long time. Yes, but you don't be like Dr. K here and go to the gym once a month. You got to go consistent. You got to go as often as you can. So, and that's true. I do, right? So go consistent, get that muscle memory, get that workout going, and then follow up with what we would call cardio. In this case, would be psychotherapy. Nutrition is what you do in your own time. And that's what we do with this practice, and emphasize that this is a non-invasive, non-systemic. I say non-invasive, non-systemic. I hear it all the time, but what does that mean? That literally means we're not injecting anything to anybody. We're not taking anything. Non-systemic, we're talking about your metabolic profile. You're not taking medication. It's not going to give you any extra effects. These are things I think we should say in more of a human terms or layman terms to make it less intimidating and less overwhelming, because a lot of front desk people that I've trained and mystery called and shopped, and I hear one thing: we offer TMS, it's non-invasive, FDA cleared with neuroplastic response at your dorsolateral. No, let's not do that. That can overwhelm a lot. I think that's where I see,
Right.
from what I've seen, I think that's been a big barrier.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, very true. I think we definitely noticed the same, and we would give people kind of a very brief rundown on the mechanism of action, but it was more so to help them reframe the SSRI theory, right? Because a lot of people are coming in and they're like, I thought I just had low serotonin, but the SSRIs I've been on don't work. And so we're kind of like, yeah, the neuroscience is really kind of showing something else is going on. There's deeper brain structures involved, and TMS increases neuroplasticity. So we'll kind of like help reframe the sort of underlying theory about why this will even work, because otherwise it feels like it doesn't really reconcile with their like internal mental health model. But I think the most important part that I've noticed is just letting patients know that other people similar to them have come in with with the exact same complaints and really similar histories and have done really well. Just letting people know that they're not alone, and that people like that, and that this has worked really well for people like them, can be a really important game changer.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I want to point out one thing I think we tend to have a lot of confusion around in the TMS space is, what is the definition of a consultation? For a psychiatrist, a consultation is a clinical visit, but in TMS, I've actually had a distinction of what it means to me. And I know for a lot of people it's the same. And Ben, I know for you it's been somewhat relative and similar, is that a consultation is just an information session. And there should be two types of consultations, or from your phrase, two interactions, and one being the consultation. The phone call, when that phone call is picked, or the phone's picked up and you're talking to that patient, you have 10 minutes to really nourish this patient with the information, but hear them out. Make sure it's a two-way interaction, not you speaking for 5 minutes. Because I've heard that. I've heard situations where we haven't asked the patient their name, what are they calling for, what do they really need, and kind of having an open conversation, and that being a macroscopic overview. If the patient's interested, hey, let me set you up with a consultation, meet with one of our coordinators or technicians or even provider, and 30 minutes of a patient coming onto a video call or in office and going into the microscopic details, to Ben's point, the serotonin discussion, neuroplasticity, which is what I do. I have a slide deck that I've created with Solstice, and I train the team members on intake side of things to have a deeper microscopic discussion in person through a video form or in person, and let that be the nitty-gritty details, because that's where the buy-in really, becomes more evident to me at that time. So make sure the consultation distinction is understood, and making sure that it's a phone call plus a second conversation if needed. Obviously, scenario A, if patient says, sign me up on the phone, there's no need for consultation, go right ahead, right? But if that
Right.
person needs some education, that's what this is about. And one last thing I want to say on this, set the bar of what you would want for yourself. If you were
Right.
looking at mental health treatment and you found TMS and it was novel to you, what would you expect? Deliver
Exactly.
that type of experience. That's how I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great. This is very inspiring. Okay, we got room for a couple more questions. And again, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. We will answer them later if we can't get to them all, but please do not post them as anonymous because we will not be able to respond to you. Somebody says, I have a new practice I'm launching. What are the biggest mistakes that new TMS practices make, in their first year? I don't know if mistakes just the right word, but like what are the things? I guess what they're looking for is what are the things to do, not to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Ben, I'll let you start with that one. I'm sure you've seen plenty of that. and, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
what not to do. That should be the title of my memoir. I I think I think misunderstanding or misinterpreting the insurance requirements
Okay.
is a fairly big deal, or underestimating just how difficult the insurance approval process is, because
Right.
you really do need a system to handle it. It just needs to be treated differently than like your standard medication prior authorization. So have a clear system, who does it, how are you collecting the information, and who's collecting it? It can be a staff member up front who gets med history. It can be a provider during the consultation or the evaluation who's getting the med history. But get some dates, get some dosages, get names. I know patients don't remember, but just do the best you can.
Yeah.
Great.
I would say that's, yeah, Ben, insurance side of it, I think we jump into it thinking it's the old school insurance way where you just submit the claim and then get reimbursed, and it's a whole other hoop to jump through. One other thing I also would mention is, be patient. I think a lot of TMS practices that start up because of the excitement, it's like, and again, I'm not saying this is what Welcome or Magstem do, but I've seen device manufacturers pitch the device and say, hey, in 3 months, if you can get 10 patients, here's how much you're going to get in a return,
Right.
and then that'll pay for the chair. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. But I think every demographic is different. Every market is different. There's certain dynamics to it
Yeah.
you have to understand. And on top of it, you have to give yourself the element of this being a process. If I tell a TMS patient, which I have told in the past, this is a process with TMS, give yourself 6 months to really see the durability and benefit of this and keep the continuity of care with me so we can keep things going for you in the right direction. The same goes for starting a practice. Your first couple of months are going to have some inconsistencies, but that's a good time to find what falls through the cracks. The one thing you don't want to do is have a boat that's sinking with water coming in and taking buckets and dumping water out. Find the cracks and fill them early so you can set the right well-oiled machine. And Ben, you know this really well. Ben's done this amazingly well. I take a lot of pride in doing it on my end on a much smaller level. I will say that building a well-oiled machine takes the time and takes a village.
Mhm.
But once you get it right, to replicate that becomes super easy. It's all
Right.
about the
Yeah.
systems, and I think I'm a big entrepreneur in that sense. I do a lot of the Traction Library series. I read the EOS books. I think systems are really important. And I know Ben, you've heard of those things, right? And I think we have to apply a business mindset to open a TMS practice to know that there's a time it's going to take. There's going to be a process. Patient acquisition will start to generate, but you have to give it time. And just an example of that, the client I'm seeing today, the provider I'm working with, it's been 16 months. And her complaint to me right now is, I'm too busy. Whereas last year, she's like, where are the patients? I'm like, it'll happen. It took her 18 or
Okay.
16 months to really become, to
Right.
now see a need for a second chair. I've seen some people get a second chair within 6 to 8 months. It just depends on how much time you give that process.
That's
Yeah. I think one quick thing I just want to add to kind of like common mistakes that practices may make in their first year is don't hire like a random person to be your TMS technician. Your TMS technician is the person who every single patient is going to associate with you and your practice. They're the ones that your patients are coming to talk to every single day for 2 months. And if people don't like your TMS technician, if people don't resonate or feel like your TMS technician
Yeah.
doesn't care about them, they will not come back. They will
Oh
find a
yeah.
different facility or they will just avoid this treatment in general.
Oh yeah. I've had a patient tell me she wanted to adopt my TMS technician as a second daughter, and I'm
Mhm.
like, no, like you can't do that because you're right, Ben. You have to invest in that person. They're seeing that patient more than you ever will. That's the
Yeah.
fact as a provider, right? So or a clinic owner. So invest in that person, and I always tell a lot of my clients, don't nickel and dime that role. Invest in it. Take your
Mhm.
time, find the right person, and they don't necessarily have to be a mental health professional or healthcare background. I honestly feel as long as there's a high IQ and keyword EQ,
Right.
that really helps to have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I
Yeah.
think, and I'll just add in that we work with, and I can invite my colleague in Lindy to help me answer this as well. But and there's more questions coming in. Um, Lindy, can you join us for a second? So look, we work. This is from the Magstim side of it. We work with practices all over the country, all over the world, and the ones that actually commit, they're as serious about patient treatments as they are about committing to certain marketing elements, right? So you may have built a great practice where your treatments and those parts are good, but you have to either assign or commit to having somebody lead the marketing elements within your practice, or you work with outside groups that can advise you on that. So the practices that I'm seeing survive have made that commitment. What's your thoughts on that, Lindy?
I agree. And I know this is kind of discussed earlier by the two gentlemen earlier, but educating your own staff because you get a lot of internal referrals that way, lunch and learns, and then moving out. And I heard somebody mention pediatrics because of adolescents. Yeah, I think I agree with that 100%. I think that's
Yeah.
very, very important.
Right.
You have to be more objective in who you're talking to for referrals too. I actually want to point out a really cool example on the non-clinical referral side, which has worked for some of our colleagues, is looking at the wellness space. I think it's huge. The mental wellness space is growing at a certain capacity that I think is mimicking what we see in mental health from a clinical perspective in terms of growth. And um, most wellness facilities or wellness businesses have clients or customers that are overlapping into the mental health space. So yoga studios, gyms. If someone's
Right.
going to the gym, that's a good patient you want, for your practice. So I always find that setting up a table or a booth at a gym or a yoga studio or something like that also goes a long way in terms of referrals. I'm not sure if that was a
Fantastic.
direct question, but I did a
No,
different
but
tangent there. But
it's a good point. I mean, you have to go where
yeah,
the patients go with patients are.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I am so honored and so enthusiastic about the information. I'm even writing down notes today, you guys. So I learned a
That's
lot from
awesome.
you all, and I want to thank everybody who's attended today. We've had a lot joining in, and I apologize we couldn't get to all the Q&A, but if you put your questions in there with your contact, we will respond to you. I'm going to let everybody go for the day and say thank you all for your commitment to improving patient care. That's why we're here. So with that, I appreciate everybody's commitment today, and we should do this again. What do you think?
I'd love to.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think Ben and I have so much more to talk about because the wheels are spinning in terms of some of the questions, so we can go on. And Ben, I'd like to give a whole hour to insurance if you want. We can do that too, just for fun. I'm just kidding.
More than happy to.
And I'm happy to help guide that along. All right. I'll let everybody go.
All
Have an
right.
amazing rest of your week.